Everyone, and welcome on behalf of the Santa Clarita Public Library. We're really happy to be having you here and with our experimental Facebook Live / Zoom extravaganza version of this event. Thank you to all of our authors from History Talks who are coming. And with that, also, this is a one story, one city, one event again. So if you would like to check out Eat Joy, you can do that at any of our local branches. And with that, we're going to learn some more fun food stories. And I'm going to turn it over to Anne Louise Bannon.
Hi, everybody. I'm with the Historical Novel Society and also the author of the Old Los Angeles series, featuring Maddie Wilcox, who's a winemaker and a physician. I have 4 really great authors here for you, and this is going to be really exciting. One of whom's almost an old friend, right, Jeri?
Yeah.
Yeah, really.
Actually,
I think I've known you longer. I've known any of these other gals, but Jeri's a good friend of mine, also in the crime writing genre. She's written several mysteries, including the medieval noir series with Crispin Guest, which is a lot of fun, and has a steampunk fantasy series. So there's that. And she's been doing a lot of interesting things and research to make all those things, periods, come alive. Jeri, would you do me a favor? Tell us a little bit about your last title and how food enters into that.
Let's see. It hardly ever does, really, which is funny. The last Crispin Guest I finished was the last Crispin Guest, number 15, The Deadliest Sin. That'll come out next year. And nobody eats in that. Crispin often will eat on the run. He'll eat medieval fast food, which is, you buy a pasty, little thing, or if you had a little extra money, you can buy larks on a stick. Larks on a stick. That'll never catch on. But no, songbirds on a stick was a big thing on medieval fast food. So
but he also drinks a lot.
He doesn't drink as much. He's mellowed. So he's changed off from wine to ale. He's mellowed. So it's a happy thing. It's a happy thing. Because he was getting drunk a lot.
He was
a hard-boiled detective, and so there's a lot of drinking.
Right. And next up, we have Janet Wertman, author of the Seymour Saga, a historical set of novels based on the dynasty that actually helped found the Tudor era. Janet, tell us about your last title and how food enters into that.
The last title is The Boy King, about the short reign of Edward Tudor. And with all of my books, food took me months and an enormous amount of attention to research, and it gets sprinkled in like a couple of little lines here and there, which, I kind of suspect. So, there are banquets, there are wafers, there are some interesting little tidbits, but it is not a focus. Simply because we're not allowed to show off as much as we might want to sometimes.
Doesn't that suck? All righty. And next up, we have Autumn Bardot, who writes historical romances and contemporary fantasies. And your last title was a contemporary, right?
Yes, actually, the one that's coming out on Thursday is a contemporary fantasy.
Out! Ooh, brava.
And
but go ahead.
okay.
Tell us about how food works into your historical fantasies.
Actually, food plays a major part in all of my books because I'm a foodie. And also, I believe that there's ways you can put food in to make it very kind of symbolic and show so much about the characters, the way they eat it, what they choose, who's stealing food, who's not stealing food, who's feeding whom. somebody's a glutton or not. So I love adding food into actually all of my novels. It usually plays a very, I wouldn't say it's not a big part, but it will really offer the reader clues about the character, kind of like just little Easter eggs, right? We call them Easter eggs, right? Little Easter eggs and little nuggets of information about food. And in Goddesses Inc., of course, it is 4 different cultures, 4 different goddesses from different cultures. So I managed to slide in all of their food. And it was fun. It was fun. So I was hungry for like a multitude of things.
Yeah, I'll bet. And Zenobia Neil is last up, and she is also writing historical romance featuring Roman gods and mythic past, and was actually named after an ancient warrior queen. Now, did you write about her or?
No, I actually haven't written about Zenobia of Palmyra. I know that Libby Hawker has a really great book about her called, I think, Sand and Stone. There have been some other books about her, but I've never written about.
Well, would you do me a favor and tell us how food relates to your latest title?
Yeah, so my latest title is The Queen of Warriors, and it's about a Spartan warrior woman who's captured by her former Persian bed slave 80 years after the death of Alexander the Great. So there's a lot of food in that book. Because it's part of, I always like to incorporate food because I feel like, and smells and tastes in my novels, because I feel like it makes it more realistic and accessible. So I did a lot of research on ancient Persian dishes.
Oh, how fun.
And wine.
And wine. Well, yeah, duh. I mean, come on. Wine. I have a winemaker for a character, man. I'm in the wine thing. Anyway, I'm going to ask you guys some individual questions first, so you guys each get your shot. And I'm going to start with you, Janet, because frankly, you kind of did the interactive thing with us. I remember when you were putting together some of this, and you're talking about the 4 humors, which, by the way, was still part of medical care all the way up through the 19th century. They were still talking about that.
Started back in ancient Greece, and yes, and a lot of the foods that we eat today are still like salmon with like a lemon sauce that is that was specifically derived from humoral balancing. So that
okay. Well, can you tell us about what humor balancing is and why beef is choleric? Because I am a big fan of The Taming of the Shrew, and that's a big line in there.
Okay, so the idea is that the body is made up of 4 substances: earth, fire, yellow bile, and black bile in slightly different proportions, and you need to keep them all together, or rather balanced. So beef is deemed choleric because it is warming and cold. And so I'm sorry, warming and hot. And so therefore it helps temper the choleric. Oh my goodness, it is, I've got charts, but it helps temper the choleric temperament. But the idea is that you start out as a youth with one, and it kind of can change through life, and it changes with the seasons. And so in the summer, you want to eat cooling foods. In the winter, you want to eat warming foods. In your old age, you want to warm yourself because that's younger. And so everything is, you look at a food based on how you can manage to keep yourself steady.
Cool. Cool. Okay, Jeri, you mentioned something we were talking about, or we going back and forth on our email a little while ago, and you were mentioning something about a cockatrice, which sounds vaguely filthy. And you're muted. Did anybody read her lips on that one?
I said it's not.
Ah.
That's what I said. Well, first off, this comes from a medieval recipe, and you can't talk about medieval recipes without talking about medieval cookbooks. 14th century, when what I write about in the Crispin Guest series, that's about when you started to see cookbooks. Cookbooks originally came from the Middle East, and they were physicians' prescriptions. So, you know, you add these herbs and these spices and some oils and some other unpleasant things, and that's a recipe that is a prescription. Now these evolved to become recipe books for cooks. Now you're not going to have your medieval meatloaf in these because everybody knows how to make that.
Yeah.
So what we have in the 14th century is Richard II's, the king at this time, his palace cookbook. So you're going to have in these recipes fantastical meals for hundreds and hundreds of people. So one of the ones which I thought was kind of fun was to create a cockatrice. And this is a mythological creature that is bird in front and four-legged creature in back. So I'm going to read part of the recipe in Middle English, if I can get the pronunciation correct. So what you do is you take a capon and scald him and draw him cleaner and smite him a two in the waist over thwart. Take a piggy and scald him and draw him in the same manner and smite him also in the waist. Now, I personally think more recipes need more smiting. So
I do too. I agree. I wholeheartedly am with you.
Basically, what you're doing is you're taking a chicken and you're cutting it off in the middle. You're leaving the wings because you want to present this with wings like that. So you take that, you cut that part off. You get a little piggy, a little oinker there, and you cut that in half. And then you clean them all out. You scald it. So you're taking off the feathers. You're taking off the hair of the pig, and you sew them together. And then you stuff it with all kinds of good stuff like raisins and currants and breadcrumbs and egg and all kinds of things. And you stuff it, and then you prop up the wings, and so it cooks, roasts like that. And once it comes out, once it's roasted, you put the feathers back on, and very carefully, so it looks like it's got its feathers. And you would probably take a little saffron and cover the piggy with that, because you want it to dye. A lot of times you dye the food so it's got a more grandeur to it. So the saffron mimics gold. You use parsley juice for green, so you might do that for the feathers. And can you imagine bringing this out? Now you've got tons of other things to eat.
I'm thinking my next party.
But I'm telling you, I want to hear more people making cockatrices out there. But, you know, when you present that at the table, your kids are going to go, oh, cockatrice again? You're going to need some cockatrice helper for that. So, but you want to, out of all the things you're going to be eating at these banquets in the banqueting halls, this, you know, you're going to want that, you're going to want that, but you see this cockatrice come out, and you go, oh, I want that.
Yeah.
And they made lots of things like that. So I one of these days I'm going to do that.
Hey, I'll be there for you. I'll help you, man. I'm dying.
I'll be smiting in my recipes.
Smiting. You got to smite. Autumn.
Yeah.
Now you love food. You got the food. How do you and you're writing, especially with these goddesses, you're writing a bunch of different cultures here. And some of them, like medieval times, they're coming some pretty interesting stuff. How do you start your research? How do you find out what those foods are?
Well, you just kind of Google it. It's pretty easy. You kind of just Google what's going on in the books, and there's so much really cool information out there. When I was writing The Impaler's Wife, there's just tons of blogs even about what did Vlad eat in Romania. So there's just
besides what we usually think of Vlad eating.
Sausage.
Yeah, no, not so much. But I mean, I think what's really interesting is because, you know, depending on who you're writing about or what you're writing about, I mean, the wealthy had much different eating habits. You know, they had the swans, right?
Yeah.
Than the poor folk. And even that, I've got books back there in my library about things that they ate in medieval times. And for Confessions of a Sheba Queen, I went all the way back to ancient Yemen. And that was very interesting and amazing, just because a lot of the topography has changed since I was writing about the time of Solomon. But when you see the kinds of food that they ate, and I think Jeri had mentioned something about the spices and the herbs that they are using, you realize that they were very sophisticated and they had a subtle, these herbs added a subtle and like nuanced flavor to so many dishes. And when I did a lot of food for Confessions of a Sheba Queen, from very poor food to, you know, when she was actually a queen in Saba. And I remember a blogger telling me, like, I was hungry for the goat stew. Why was I hungry for the goat stew? But it's so amazing because you can actually find all of this stuff online now.
I know.
It's just so available, and you just have to make sure that you are keeping true to the indigenous area, right? So, you know, they're not going to have spices if the spice route wasn't there yet, right? So it was interesting. And then I even took with the Impaler's wife, a famous scene, I guess, I don't want to call it a myth, but something that Vlad the Impaler was supposed to do during an Easter feast, which is coming up. And that was, well, if we have time to share that, I will share that little story.
Oh, that sounds like fun.
Huh?
Yeah. I said, that sounds like fun. Great. Zenobia, you know, you're writing about ancient Persian cuisine, which has got to be the most fascinating thing I've ever heard of, frankly. I mean, Persian cuisine now is pretty interesting, but of course it's very different because of the whole Islam thing. But have you ever found something so insanely interesting in that ancient cuisine that you said, okay, I'm going to build a scene around this?
I mean, I went to the library and got a lot of Persian cookbooks, and because I figured, you know, there are certain things that are indigenous, like Autumn was saying, to the area. And so I did kind of write a scene around a sour cherry rice dish with lamb, and then like added pistachios and date bread and honeyed wine. And so I kind of built my scene around that. But I mean, and then in other books, I've also used a lot of like dates and honey, because those are the sweet things.
Yeah, they were pretty popular in the ancient world, as I recall.
Well, yeah, because I mean, like what Autumn was saying, it's funny the times when you realize like, oh, I want to use vanilla or sugar, and they don't exist, you know, they don't exist in my time and place, right? Because there is, I mean, they have cinnamon, but it's kind of like a cologne. So, and it's also interesting to see how they use things differently. And
cinnamon was a cologne?
Well, I mean, it was like a scent that was.
Oh, well, it smells good.
For men.
Well, it is interesting because in Europe, they used these spices when they were coming in, and that was the real reason Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue, to find a route that he could bypass all the traders and go directly to India and get these things. People in Europe have no idea where cinnamon came from, what the tree or the plant or whatever. And a lot of the things, spices they use, they have no idea what they look like. They just, you know, bought these things and they were very expensive.
They're all at Trader Joe's.
Now they are. Thank God.
And the average person.
Okay, I'm going to throw this one out to all of you. So, what is the toughest part about writing food into your work? I know for me, when I was doing some of the old Los Angeles series, my biggest problem was, shoot, are they really serving mole in Los Angeles in 1870? You know, and frankly, as Jeri noticed, if you know how to make meatloaf, you're not going to write about it. we had a lot of trouble finding how they made wine in the 19th century because nobody wrote about it. They just did it. So what's the toughest part about writing food into your scenes? Anybody?
Well, I thought it was important to actually make some recipe. Now I haven't made a cockatrice, but it was important to understand the spices and the things that they'd have to use. So I made several dishes, and I've made them for other people in little feasts before. And if you want a taste of medieval England, then go get you some Moroccan food, because that's the flavors. You're going to get the spices you don't ordinarily use with meat, cinnamon and cardamom and those flavors. And they were getting a lot of these ideas from the Middle East, from the Crusades, that brought in these flavors, and they changed a lot of things. But it was also seasonal, what was available. But I think it's really funny that something like almond milk that you can get readily now is completely medieval, because you would grind up almonds until it was a fine meal. You add water until you have this almond milk, and you could drink it, but that's not what it was for. It was a dipping sauce. You make your fried parsnip fritters, and you could dip it into your almond milk. So I thought that was kind of funny. That everything old is new again.
Yeah, because I'm like drinking a lot of almond milk now because it has no carbs in it.
Right.
And unfortunately, I think parsnip fritters do.
They might a little.
I'm gonna have to check that one out. I'm thinking I've got dipping sauce on my cereal.
It's too expensive to make. Nobody's going to be drinking almond milk in those days. You would be using them for special things, for dips.
Well, yeah. And I mean, I think a lot of this was like for rich people too. I mean, especially the stuff that got written down.
Oh yeah.
Zenobia, what's the toughest part about writing food into your work?
I think for me, a lot of it is just like all the time I spend researching, and then, not being able to use a lot of that. One of my books, The Genie's Last Wish, takes place in the Ottoman Empire. And so I read this book, and it talked about what the Sultan would eat. And it was like, 20 courses, starting with the soup and having all these pies, and going back to like, well, but what would like the common person eat, or what would the Sultan just like have sent up to his room when he was too messed up on opium to go down? So like, it's just having
that one.
Yeah, so
been there, done that.
20 dishes of pigeon pie. I think also like making the food appealing, like I mean, it's interesting. Jeri's cockatrice, am I saying that right? Pie, or
yeah, it's close enough.
Roll. There's actually a recipe kind of similar in this Roman cookbook that I've been looking at, and my mom was saying, let's make this. It's like chicken stuffed with ground beef or pork, and I was like, ugh, that sounds so horrifying to me now. I mean, I guess it's not that far from a turducken. I guess people just like to like shove meat in meat.
Meat and meat and meat.
Yeah. And it just like, it seemed very Roman to me too, to like just put, it's the opposite, because it's putting the cow in the chicken instead of the pig with the chicken, and there's no smiting. But like, so, it's like I want to talk about interesting things and make people think about how our tastes and ideas of tastes have changed, but not like have them be like, oh, this is so gross. Why is this person,
Yeah, it's like that Roman fish sauce that
I was just thinking of the garum of the fish sauce. Like, you don't want to have them all like having fish sauce and then kiss, which is the main reason they didn't kiss in ancient Rome, because they all just had a lot of
no, you wouldn't have to
brush their teeth with pee, I think. So.
Yeah. Janet, what's the toughest part about writing food into your work?
So one of the hardest thing, but the most rewarding, was to be able to make a reference to the introduction of champagne, which happened right So apparently, like when Henry was trying to make friends with Francis in France, there were monks at a Benedictine abbey in France that on Francis's behalf sent Henry and his court like a case or whatever the Tudor equivalent of a case was of Blanquette de Limoux, and everybody got to enjoy this sparkling wine. So I was able to capitalize on that and use it. So it was, I mean, it just kind of slid in right there, but that was a very lucky thing.
Oh, I bet. And you know, of course, the whole Dom Perignon thing. Come hear me. I have tasted the stars and it was just a mistake. For those of you who don't know, that's how champagne, if you bottle it before it's finished fermenting, that's how you get those bubbles. In fact, they add extra sugars and yeast to make it bubble some more, and they do that. All right, Autumn, what is the toughest part about writing food into your work?
You know, I don't actually find that it's trouble at all. I kind of really enjoy adding the food into it because I just feel like it gives, I guess for lack of a better word, flavor, right, to a text. And I like to show the relationship with the food. So it's like you find all the examples of food and what they ate. And then when you can just kind of throw it in there to kind of reveal more about them or the plot. I mean, I've had people in one novel that they were poisoned through the bread. I have another where it's showing gluttony. In Dragon Lady, they were all about the food for, I would say, the last third of the book because of the famine that was going on. So you're really able to show that when somebody brings food to you, right, that it is loving and caring. And, you know, even if they had to slaughter a whole village to bring you the food, right, they brought you the food. Or, for example, in The Impaler's Wife, oranges, very rare. They had to come from far away. So, you know, one of the stories about Vlad Dracula is that one of his mistresses, while he was gone at another castle, was ordering oranges from far away, and because she was pregnant. And so then I guess the women got extra goodies. And so that led him to come right back and determine if she was actually pregnant with his child. So even ordering something like, you know, getting something like oranges was a treat. And we don't think of that here, especially in California, as a treat. But my grandmother grew up back in Pennsylvania, and she said that they got an orange for Christmas because it was a treat. And that orange came all the way from Florida.
Yeah.
So I think
that whole industry.
Yeah. So it just, you know, if the characters feed each other or if they stalk off from the table. So the food, you can just throw in the little details of the food, but then use that food to create scenes like in real life when you're sitting at the dinner table, right? Mm-hmm. Do you want to eat with that person? If you like them, then you're okay eating with them. And if you don't like them, what happens? You're not so hungry anymore.
Yeah. No, it's a lot of fun. I mean, and you know, but there's also the problem I think most of us have. Now, this one actually is for Jeri and Janet, possibly Autumn, because you brought it up, and maybe Zenobia, because it may be there. What about when food becomes the bad guy? I write murder mysteries, guys. Sometimes there's something not so nice in that food, you know. And, you know, God knows, food could be, food poisoning, even if it wasn't intentional, could be a real problem way back when. So how do you deal with it? How do you make food the bad guy sometimes?
Well, in ancient Rome, they were gluttons, right? So, you know, you're in the Emperor's Assassin, she goes to one of Nero's feasts and it's food, and it's decadence. And while the people are starving, same thing with the Impaler's Wife. There's a scene in there where they're enjoying their wedding feast and they're bringing all this food. And I don't think it was bird on a stick, though. Perhaps that was an hors d'oeuvre. And you know, he's angry because they are all gorging on the wedding feast, whereas the rest of Romania is starving.
Yeah.
So like I said, food can really, I don't know if it's a bad guy, but it definitely triggered something like for many of us when we see a food that doesn't, it's not, I mean, food is always good, right? Because you eat it and it's nourishing, but it always represents something more to people than just, you know, food.
Well, I will beg to differ with food being good because I hate Brussels sprouts. So, but Zenobia, you look like you were about to say something about that.
Oh, I was going to say, in answer to your question, how can food be the bad guy? I was going to say dysentery, which is, I have a whole part of one of my novels where there's some dysentery, because I read that more soldiers died of dysentery than in the war for Alexander the Great. I think, I can't remember if it was also the Civil War, but that might have been a different story, but that dysentery was a major problem. And I mean, it's not really food, it's more a lack of what we now consider just basic hygiene, but that's one way that it can be the bad guy.
In most military situations, there was dysentery killed most people.
Yeah.
Killed Richard II's father, who didn't get to be king. That's why Richard II got to be king. Mm-hmm. But I think of food. I mean, there was one instance in one of my mysteries where there was poisoned wine, but mostly it's to build on Autumn's banquets, where everybody is gorging themselves and the poor are dying on medieval tables, big expensive tables. The food, you didn't have plates, you had trenchers, you had bread. It was designed to be your plate, and all the food would soak up all that stuff that you had on your plate in your trencher, and that would be later. You wouldn't eat that because the almoner would take that and distribute that to the poor. So you would have all this greasy gravy bread that had extra nutrition on it, as long as you can get it before it starts to go bad.
Yeah, that's not bad. I wouldn't know.
Janet, so there was that, you know.
Yeah.
I'm going to twist this. And
oh,
so
please.
It's not going I'm getting away from the dysentery. Where it can be, food can be used to diss someone politically. And so wafers, for example, anything with sugar and butter, the wafers especially, pressed between like little hot irons, were part of the sumptuary laws. So the Tudors were governed by rules as to what people were allowed to wear, and all of that. They were also governed by what they were allowed to eat. So if you were not at a certain level, you were not allowed to eat wafers. And literally wafers was really just for royalty. And so in The Boy King, I had somebody look at Elizabeth, who was Henry's daughter, even though technically she'd been bastardized, and go, you know, are you allowed to eat that? And then I had her get him back really well by saying, well, you know, I was offering them to my brother. I wasn't offering them to you. So you can take the food and then like twist it back on top of them. So that is another way that food can be, you know, effective.
Food is important to us, isn't it? Really, when you think about it, I mean, you know, it's so much of the culture.
Yeah.
Is part of the whole food thing. I'm going to ask two questions that are a little weird. Janet, getting back to you, the whole wafer thing, how is that related to the communion host? Because when I think of a communion host, it's a wafer. And, you know, and in Tudor England, that was kind of an issue, wasn't it?
These were bigger. These were much bigger. So it was just kind of like, so we probably, although that might have been why they were restricted just to royalty. So and to very high people.
Now somebody else may know this because you've all been, but you know, Jeri, you talk about medieval ale. You've made ale, you and your husband, and everything. Okay, and we do have a question in the chat, but I'm going to finish this one and then we're going to start opening up to questions anyway. So start typing, folks. But the first stuff is yeast and wine. I had been reading, and it's really hard to find recipes for winemaking because people just did it. And I mean, I was at the California Wine Industry Archive researching for mine. People knew about yeast. They knew that it leavened bread. Were they pitching medieval ale with the yeast, or were they basically doing what we call nowadays a native ferment, just letting it happen?
No, you save the barm from your last batch. And it's like a sourdough. You save the foam off the top and you make your next batch with that, and so on and so forth, because they knew something was going on. But they really
they didn't know what, but they knew.
The beer in medieval, the ale, excuse me, in medieval England was the barley and whatever other grain you would be using, and the water and the barm, and that was it. No hops. Hops was later, a little bit later, and that served as flavoring and also preservative. So you don't really have much of a preservative in your beer. You'd be drinking it pretty fast.
Damn.
You'd add a lot of things. It would be sweeter. You'd add all kinds of herbs, things that you wouldn't do today. We did that at home, and it made a very interesting, weedy kind of flavor. Because you have to sprout the grain first a little bit, just a little bit, and then you have to dry it out. Now, we don't have a big old Kyle house to dry it all out, so we carefully put it in a pillowcase and put it low in the dryer. so we dried it out so that you can start malting that, get the sugars, because you can't get sugars out of the grain unless it starts to sprout and then dry. So there's all these little complicated things, and then grind it, grind the grain. So we added different things. Carnation, you can use carnations, tansy, all kinds of herbs in your beer.
Wait a minute, tansy's toxic, isn't it?
No, it isn't. Not in your. I don't know if parts of it are, but they use tansy for all kinds.
I'm trying to remember. Oh dear, it's been so long. Anyway, we have a question on Facebook for Zenobia.
Yes.
You're on, girl. Did the Persians use food as alchemy, as in aphrodisiacs, or to elicit emotional reactions to certain foods, or use certain dishes as insults?
I'm sure that they did those things. It's been a while since I researched this specific period in time. I know that there were a lot of different foods that were used as aphrodisiacs, like honey or dates, ginger, were some, I think, and figs had like a sexual connotation, and another meaning as well.
What was the other meaning?
But whole in ancient Greek.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's not what I thought. I thought it would be more sack, but it's that's the ancient Greek. Anyway, this is an adult talk.
Sorry, guys.
So I'm sure that there were like alchemy components as well, but I can't say off the top of my head what they were. I didn't use any scenes like that, but I mean, I did definitely use like honey and tea to represent certain things. Yeah.
Yes, Tori Adams is noting tannins can have toxic effects, and I know when I get too much loose tea, it definitely has pain in the old heart thing.
Yeah.
Another Facebook question, and this is for everybody. What food or dish have you researched and thought, I'd like to try that? Autumn, why don't you start?
I'm going to tell you what I researched and decided not to try first. So I wrote Dragon Lady, and one of the staples that they had during times of famine was they had rice and silkworms. So I'm also a teacher, and I have a great diverse population in my classroom. And I asked my students who has had silkworms, and all of my Asian students had either, but when they visited relatives, or you can actually just get them at the local Asian market. And I said, well, how does that taste? They're like, yeah, it's okay. It's okay. But it was high in protein. It was high in protein. So even though I could go get them down the street at the local Asian market, I am not going to try the fried silkworms and rice. No, not going to try that. But I have made, of course, a Hungarian goulash. And when I was writing Confessions of a Sheba Queen, I made a lot of lamb, much to my husband's consternation, because he doesn't like lamb. And I love the lamb sweet. So I sweetened it with leeks and honey. And I would make all of those dishes because, I mean, they're still delicious, right? Cucumbers and all of the, the creams that they used. And of course, I didn't have any goat's milk, which is what they used, but definitely the lamb. And usually whatever I'm writing is what I'm eating also, because I just get hungry for it.
Hey, who wouldn't? Janet, what have you researched and said, I want to try that?
Not turducken. That is just the one where so many of the dishes in the Tudor times were really showy. I would eat so many of their desserts. So one of their best things is like the marmalades, which they'll just put in, which they'll also make solid. They'll get to like, it's almost like a cheese consistency that you would put on top of the bread. It's like the wildest thing. You can really just like slice it up. It's anything sweet I will eat. It's the rest of the stuff that they would make that I have a little bit. Although a lot of it is the meat pies, and those are also wonderful. But that doesn't seem as much strongly Tudor as it does timeless to me. So I'll just.
Hey, look, I've made a turducken.
Have you really?
We did it for Thanksgiving, and we tried it, and it's, oh my God, watching my husband and my father try to pull that sucker out of the oven, it was amazing. But anyway, Zenobia, what have you researched and thought, God, I gotta try that?
Well, the sour cherry rice was really appealing to me, like rice with sour cherries and then like pistachios. And I'm not really a huge fan of saffron, but it sounds good. I like the idea, but not the taste. And I mean, just all kinds of Greek food, feta cheese, tzatziki, hummus, which I think is like as old as time, and pita bread, but also just like, any kind of baklava with like a honey cake type thing.
Oh yeah,
which I think the Romans often put pepper on, which is really weird, but also really intriguing, like to mix that up. Yeah. Hungry?
Jeri, your turn. What do you thought you would want to eat? You researched and said, I gotta try that.
Well, I've made a lot of medieval food, but one of the things that I liked was the cheese pie, which is essentially, it's kind of a cheesecake, but with soft cheese, like brie, and including the skin, And I made it the non-medieval way by putting it in a blender, ye old blender, and I didn't want to have to do that for a long period of time, but it's very good. It's mildly sweet. It's just enough sweetness, and I flavored it with carnation petals. So it was just this light, wonderful, flavorful pie that you can have it in a crust, sitting in the crust. And it was very tasty, and I've made it a couple times actually, because it's really good and not too sweet.
Well, see, yeah, and I mean, some cheesecake can be pretty grim that way. All righty. Well, do we have any other questions? We've got 15 more minutes here. So there is, Okay, I've got a question for each of you. Describe your favorite food scene in your own books. Zenobia, why don't you start?
You know what? Give me a minute. Let me think about that.
All right, sorry. Don't mean to jump on you. Autumn?
My favorite food scene would be Confessions of a Sheba Queen, just because it's not something I made up. It actually, I mean, that's the mythology of it. And the mythology is that when the Queen of Sheba went to go visit Solomon, he wanted to get her in bed, but she was playing hard to get. And so he knew he had to trick her a little bit. So he prepared his favorite dishes, and his favorite dishes were all extremely spicy. So he gives her all this super spicy food for the meals. And then he says to her, he says, it's late, don't go to your own, her accommodations across the way, stay here. She says, oh, you're going to try some hanky panky. He says, no, I promise, if you don't take anything of mine, I will not touch you. That's the story. Okay. And of course, so she wakes up in the middle of the night, he's good to his word, he's Solomon, and her mouth is on fire, right? So she goes to I guess the equivalent of the nightstand, and pours some water and drinks some water to cool the burn in her mouth. And that's when he rolls over and says, you took something of mine. So I think that it was fun because I got to write that into the novel. And of course, from there, because that one happens to be, historical erotica, we did the whole goat milk and honey bath, which was a lot of fun. And I've had people say, I want a goat milk and honey bath.
Yeah, but you're not drinking it.
No, you're just bathing in it. Like, how luxurious is, well, they were doing other things, but how luxurious is that?
Very luxurious.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Zenobia, you're on.
Okay. So I have a scene where the Queen of Warriors has been a captive for a while, and she gets unbound from the bed and goes to eat with Artaxerxes. And the food is so delicious, and I say that he fed her, but she hadn't been hungry until now. And it's like she's totally tormented and tempted, not tormented, but she's like, really, the food is really delicious, but also she's really into him sitting across the table in his Persian eyeliner and his embroidered gold cloak and all of his jewelry and his beard and his earrings and stuff. So it's like, it's the food, but it's also the company, like Autumn was talking about as well.
Well, gee, isn't that the whole point? I mean, a food and company. Jeri,
sorry.
What is your favorite food scene or wine scene? We'll go with both.
Well, because they're mysteries, we're not spending a lot of time doing that kind of stuff. So I don't really have one. In the steampunk book, there is a scene where the characters go to, it's not a tea room because they had no such thing then. There was something else. They were not quite cafes, but you could get tea and some food. But I had to research a Victorian food that you would get in such a place, and boy, none of it sounded very good at all. It's boiled beef, and you have a saveloy, which is like a hot dog, on your plate, and lots of fish things that I wouldn't like herring and sardines and things.
Some people like those, but I don't.
So no, I don't. So I mean, I had to look up what the average person would have gotten at such a place, and it just sounded terrible. But they had a nice discussion. It was a very interesting, sort of erotic discussion, and then I was all spoiled.
Oh, sausages on a plate. Never mind. Yeah, I'm sorry, Morgan. I really am. I write mysteries too, but the food sometimes turns into it. I mean, in the old Los Angeles series, there's a scene where the kids are commenting how, they've gotten a free chicken and, to be paid, and she roasts it so it's all crackly on the outside, and I was like munching on some roasted chicken skin. Oh, I love that stuff. Anyway, Janet.
That was more the tack that I took in Jane the Queen.
Can you
was-
speak up? I can't hear you, honey.
Sure. That was more of the tack that I took in Jane the Queen, where there was this woman who lived in France in Calais, who had been trying to get her daughters placed at court for years, through like Catherine of through Henry's first two queens. And here Jane Seymour comes, and she's pregnant and she's craving quail. And this woman manages to get a hold of, apparently there were like no quail in England at the time, and this woman manages to get her like a brace of them, a whole bunch that she sent over. And Jane just reacts with, okay, I'm gonna have to take one of her daughters. And you know, they start talking about which one, and it's like, well, you know, how many of these quail? And no, I'm only going to take one of them, but I'll place the other one in a good place. So you can kind of see the equivalent of food to patronage right there. So.
Well, you know, it's like we say, food is important. We've done a lot of research, all of us, on our various interests and things like that. And I got asked this question yesterday when I was doing another Zoom for the Sisters in Crime. How do you keep from overwriting? You know, adding in too much.
Well, that's easy. I don't put them in at all.
Well, yeah, I got that from you, Jeri.
Problem solved.
But well, I mean, but you also have the same problem that there are all sorts of cool things apart from food that end up in your books. And I mean,
sure, but a lot
talked about the cross. I've talked with you before about the crossover between the modern noir novel and the medieval.
But a lot of it is you've researched it. You know who ate what, and that basically informs the characters and who they are. And Crispin, of course, came from the nobility and lost it all.
Yeah.
So there's all that kinds of things that he would just love to have but can't afford. Yeah. And you know, and he's always checking the larder. You know, do we have any food? Or if John of Gaunt shows up to his home to speak to him privately, you know, he worries, do I have any wine for him? Can I serve? So that's the problem of food is, for him, a different situation. He lives differently now, and his expectations have been lowered. And so he just worries that he's not going to be able to feed Jack, his apprentice. And later, when Jack has a family, is there going to be enough food in the house? Are we going to earn enough this week to feed everyone?
Well,
so
it was a big problem for a lot of people throughout history, and even sadly to say today sometimes. Zenobia, I mean, really seriously, how do you keep from overwriting?
Well, I mean, I think it's the same thing as any kind of thing that you edit out. You know, is it going to serve the story? Does it work in the scene? Does it reflect the characters? You know, so it's like overwriting food. It's like I might have discovered a bunch of dishes, but they wouldn't work in that season, in that place, and the character might not want to eat it. So I think, you know, it's like any other part where you edit what you've, where I edit what I've overwritten.
How about you, Janet?
Me, it's easy. I have a blog. So
there you go.
And so all of this stuff, it is much easier to cut something out of a story if you know it's not going to get just like, you know, on the floor. If you can use it in a blog about the factual stuff, and you feel about only putting what you really need really serves the scene.
Well, that's one way to handle it.
Right.
How about you, Autumn?
You know, when I write a first draft, I don't include any names of the food. I'll just drop in, they ate something, they drank something, there was a feast, there was food. And then when I go back to my second, you know, other drafts, that's when I'm actually including it. So I'm not fixated on the food, just what the food is doing for the story. And so, yeah. And so then that's when you kind of like, I make food charts, like with my other charts. And so I can kind of choose what did they want. And, is it going to be like a little Easter egg where there's some little like extra little tidbit about whatever it is that they're eating that I want to put in there. But otherwise, yeah, so I'm not, and I think for probably a lot of new writers, they do want to include, all of that great detail and put in all of that food. But ultimately, I think a reader wants to hear what the food is. Maybe when they want to smell it or get a sense of the texture of it, but then like, let's move on with the story.
Right.
Yeah, because the food isn't the story, except in very, very rare cases. All right. How many of us are hungry now? And I had dinner, damn it. All right. When you look at ancient food, older or historical foods versus what you're eating now, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For me, it's almost always the variety that we have access to.
And the shelf life.
Oh, really? How
Well,
so?
I mean, yeah, actually, my friend moved to England, and she said that she was amazed by how quickly the food spoiled because it didn't have the same kind of preservatives that we have in the States.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, we have so much variety and so much, trade, but I think also the fact that like we have a refrigerator, and so, you can buy salmon and eat it in a week, or not that I would do that, but certain kinds if it's smoked, but like, the idea of like, I don't have to go to the store every 3 days or every day like they used to.
Yeah.
And so I think the fact that we have preservatives and canning techniques and preservation techniques, that it lasts longer.
Okay.
Preserving techniques is also, you have to know how they did that then.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they had those too, but not to the same.
And smoking and there's some other things, but I mean, there weren't that many things.
No.
Right.
And milk would be used for cheese. You wouldn't want to waste it to drink.
Mhm.
You gotta make cheese out of it, and cheese lasts longer.
Yeah.
And so those all those things that you need to know, even if they don't end up in the story, they inform your character.
It was kind of interesting because I was reading a text on cheese making a couple, 3 years ago. And one of the things they were saying was the types of cheese you made was directly reflected by how fast you were going to eat it. Because the Alpine cheeses, they all got to be hard cheeses because they needed to last months. Whereas the Bries and the soft camemberts that we love from France, you ate them right away.
Mm-hmm.
So, but, Janet, did you get a chance to talk about, food now versus then?
Food now is, thank goodness for airplanes and other delivery mechanisms so that we can eat fruit in the winter, and we have the choice of flipping the seasons, even more so than preservatives. We just go get it from somewhere else and pick it all in so that you're not stuck in January and February just eating your root vegetables until spring.
I think people forget sometimes how small things were back then.
Yeah.
How small the vegetables, but I mean, everything was, I think, better. It's like we go, oh, organic. It's not like, if you get almonds are delicious, but if you go get somebody's like who actually has an almond tree and eat a real almond, you're like, oh my gosh, this is what an almond tastes like. So I think they had more flavorful food, but also it did, like the chicken breasts now are this huge. What chicken is that big, right?
No.
So
they're becoming dinosaurs again.
So everything was smaller and I think probably gamier and just smaller overall. And I think we're used to everything being big sized, where an apple would have been small.
Yeah.
And carrots were not orange.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And they were very important. And we're right at 7:30, aren't we, Morgan? So we're at time, aren't we?
We are. So I was going to say, if there's anyone else who wants to give a question, we can go ahead and do that, but I'll do the official closing remarks first. So thank you again on behalf of the Santa Clarita Library and the One Story, One City Committee for the month of March. So thank you all so much for coming and sharing your stories, both delicious and slightly less than delicious. Again, it's just such a privilege and a pleasure to have members of the Historical Novel Society come and talk to us. It's just so wonderful. So anyone who does need to go now is free to go, of course. And if anyone would like to know more about One Story, One City programming, you can see that at our website, santaclaritalibrary.com. And with that, thank you. If there's any other questions, we can do them really fast.
Morgan,
if we all have time.
thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun. If you're still with us, please check out our authors and our books on our website. Please buy one. And you have to ask people to buy. I hate to do that, but you do. And everybody, really, this has been a blast. I love talking about food. I love talking about wine. The only thing I like more is actually eating and drinking wine. So, all right, Zenobia, thank you so much, darling. Jeri, love you, darling. Autumn, so good. Janet, pleasure as always.
Thank you,
So,
Anne.
what?
And thank you, Anne.
Well, thank you guys, and we'll talk soon.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.